Now we get to the solid fuels. And the solid fuels really are the oldest fuels that man has used. We look at a whole group of solid fuels here. Of course, we talk about all the woods, but you have charcoal, the coal, you have sticks and brush and wax and different things like that, and then some trioxane tablets, which is a more expensive and a man made fuel here. So let's break these down. Well, we can talk about candles and wax. It's a simple, small flame. It's great in the dark if you have a candle. And by the way, I buy lots of ugly candles. This is at DI candles, for 10 cents and 29 cents and whatever they are. They're kind of ugly, but I can melt those things down and I can turn them into a new candle with my candle molds or dipping them. Handy thing to have. So this wax is a great thing to have. It's a very useful thing to have. It's a little light, but a little light is a whole lot better than no light when you don't have any other choice. You may find some candles like this. I think they still make these. I think I saw them, the New Wick 120-hour candle in here. Well, I have, and you can have as many as 6 of these wicks burning in here, and you have a little tweezer so you can pick one up and blow it out so you can have one burning or more burning if you want to. So a little bit of light is really nice. And by the way, one of the things for backpacking and camping, I always carried one of these little pink lady candles in here because if you're trying to get a fire going, when you have really wet wood, damp wood in here, you have a candle will burn longer than a match so you can get a fire going. So the same thing maybe at home, you'll need to consider that. Now, biomass and wood. It's most common and it's been gathered by man for, I don't know, thousands of years. I've had a lot of biomass, i.e., firewood fires in the cold, in the winter, and other times. And you may want to store, split wood for a stove. If you have a way to heat with stove and cook with the wood and heat with wood, great thing to have. And in our area where we have a small population and we have a forest around us, that's not too bad of an option, but you want to be sure that you have the tools to work with in this, and that'll be the axes and the safety glasses, shields, and things like that. And you may want to have a chainsaw as long as you have the fuel to run that and the oil to run it, and you can maintain that thing. Boy, that's a much faster way to do it with an axe. By the way, get good with an axe because maybe that's what you're going to have to do someday after you've used up all of your fuel oils and your gasolines and things like that. Now then, in our mountains here around Horseshoe, I've got a fair amount of wood that's up there, standing dead and down dead. But then consider this: in a grid down world, maybe you're going to have to walk and drag that stuff down. So you might want to be gathering some of it now because it's going to be a real pain to go get that once we no longer have transportation. And I use pallets. Now I have a bunch of pallets, although I don't use them so much for firewood. But if you can collect pallets, be sure that you can do that because a lot of these are recycled and you might get picked up by the cops if you don't have permission. Scrap wood and all kinds of wood that you can find, it can be very useful, and particularly for getting a fire started. And this is, if you haven't heard this terminology, this is what's called fat wood here. That was a standing tree that was dying. It had been injured somehow, and it has a whole bunch of sap in it that has settled down in there, and it's hardened over time. And that is fat wood, and that burns like kerosene once you get it started. It has a lot of energy in it. It smells wonderful also. So you can have around you the wood burning stoves and the cook stoves. That's a very useful thing to have in your house because you can get some heat out of that and you can keep that going in our area here. Now, if you're in a big city area, forget it. You don't have much of a chance to do it for very long. Something else you can be using, this will conserve your fuel, is these rocket stoves. And there's much fancier ones than this. I've had this for a dozen years here, the rocket stove that you can buy. You can also make them, and you can look that up online. Little plans for these things, different ways of making rocket stoves, and there's a whole bunch of people have gone into the business of making them after this one was available, which was the Stove Tech, which is really the first rocket stove that was being sold commercially. But they're much more efficient in their use of fuel than just having an open campfire. And of course, you can put all kinds of different pots and/or cast iron utensils on that to cook with. Now we get to what I call the black fuels. One of them is found and the other one is man-made. When we talk about being found is, well, that's coal. Coal is a actually pretty darn good fuel, although it's really sooty and smelly and what have you, and it does produce copious amounts. In fact, these black fuels, when you burn them, they produce a lot of carbon monoxide, so they need to be used outside and or in a vented appliance like these stoves right here, so that you carry the fumes to the outside and you don't allow them to escape inside. Charcoal and the charcoal briquettes is a nice thing to have. You can buy that and store them. You want to keep them in a place where they're going to be dry. Store them either in their original bag, because those are plastic lined bags, and it'd be a good idea to put that inside of another container because they can absorb moisture and then they have a tendency to swell and just fall apart. Of course, you can make charcoal other ways. This stuff that's left over after you've burned your wood in completely, or you can produce charcoal that could work very nicely for both filtering water and then also in one of these rocket stoves, you can make that with a charcoal cooker like I have in my backyard right now to produce this nice black charcoal, not briquettes, but pure virgin charcoal. And then that charcoal can be used in the rocket stoves or in these charcoal cookers like this, and it'll do a nice job. But remember, outside, outside, outside only. Do not bring that inside because of the danger of that. You can make rocket stoves like this. This is one I made, I don't know, many, many years ago, using a number 10 can, fuel being put in from the side, a smaller can in here. So you can build things like that. But here's the stove tech and or new ones like this that will burn charcoal very nicely if you've designed it to take the charcoal as well as taking the sticks that you'd want to put into it. Now, storing of these solid fuels is something you have to consider. Well, in the case of the wood, you want to keep the stuff dry. It needs to be covered. It's best if it's actually inside of a shelter, a very good shelter, so it can stay dry and stay covered. With coal, same thing. It needs to be kept dry. In fact, coal, once it's dug out of the ground, it actually starts to oxidize very slowly. But if you were to store coal above ground after 15 or 20 years, you'll find it gets to be kind of crumbly and it'll be breaking apart. It's actually oxidizing. And so it's a little messier that way. The way that you store coal is you bury it, dig a pit, line it with your plastic sheet or tarps. Put your coal in there, cover it over very nicely. Ooh, of course, you want to do this in an area where it's going to be dry and not have water draining into it. And then cover it over. In fact, it'd be good if it's actually above ground where you mound it up and then bury it in there because that'll keep the oxygen out and it'll keep it from oxidizing and crumbling and breaking down so that after 10, 15 years, you still have your original coal. And then, as I mentioned, your charcoal, you want to store it where it's going to be dry. Now we have